What do you think, bitch?
Well, so Miles speaking right now, I think that I do think that for me, the greatest kind of success that I've had on a particular project or in exploring a role does come through collaboration. I wouldn't want to do a movie where everything I do, the director just says good job and that I am under-directed. At the same time, I've done movies where I felt like I was kind of over-handled and over-directed, and I didn't feel like I was able to kind of do some stuff that I wanted to. So I think it's kind of it's a fine line. But at the end of the day, at least I do need somebody to kind of see what I'm doing, because especially in film, I don't know exactly even though I'm feeling it right here, maybe it's not playing that way in the camera. So for sure, for me, I do like directors that really will kind of inspire me with ideas and give me something to kind of chew on during the scene and something to get a better performance.
JK?
God, he goes on, doesn't he? God, I hope not. I mean, masochists, I guess, do. I mean, I completely agree with the feeling the need for or the benefits of being pushed, and of being directed on a project and collaborating. But the kind of manipulation and abuse, I think has no place in life.
I mean, I guess Damien could talk to you a little bit about that, because I was not in the editing room for all of it. I hope it was sweetened a little bit, because at the end of the day, Andrew becomes a much better drummer than Miles was. Although I have a pretty good skill set with him. It's something that absolutely through hours practice I got to a pretty good place with it. But yeah, I started getting blisters. It's funny, because when I read the script, there's all this talk and the blood splatters on the cymbals and all this stuff. And I would come on to set sometimes, I would look at the drum kit and there's all this blood there, and I literally would be like, Damien would be like, that's too much, no way. Like, it's just like, there's too much blood. And he goes, no, man, like, when I was playing, all my drumsticks were covered in blood, and this is real, this is truthful. So, I started getting some bloody blisters, and, I was bandaging them up and stuff. And just the nature of filming a movie like this in 19 days was very kind of intense. Drumming sequences, a lot of that sweat is real, and that's great, because you don't have to act when you're actually kind of playing to exhaustion. I remember JK told me to hold back a little bit. He's like, man, we're going to have a couple takes of this, you should save some. And then I was like, yeah, you're right. Damien, what are you doing, man? I need to save some. And so a lot of it was kind of life imitating art, which was nice. But yeah, as far as the sound goes on.
No, I mean, I think Miles said everything. I mean, it's just, certainly we did a lot of work in the editing room. So a lot of it is just sort of raw stuff from on set. A lot of it is stuff from pre-records, but everything that you see in the movie, pretty much, with the exception of a few shots, is this guy. I mean, they like to joke about. Yeah, certainly when you have this kind of schedule, we didn't have that many takes at our disposal, but. Every once in a while, we would kind of, we didn't have time to rehearse. So first time Miles and Melissa ever met was their first day of shooting. First time Miles and JK met was, I think we did one read-through we were able to do of the script.
JK didn't even remember I was there. Or did you not remember doing it? Yeah, you don't remember. You don't remember doing it.
Seriously?
How much my actors really care about these things. So certainly everything was very kind of shortchanged, and you worry about that in the moment. But when you have people like the people at this table, they just sort of brought it every day, and there's a lot of stuff in the movie that we knew we had to kind of get in one or two takes in order to allow for the things that we just knew we'd have to do many takes of. So for example, and Miles sort of referring to this, the scene where JK is circling through the three drummers. Was done mainly kind of as a single take that was done over and over and over again without cutting. We sort of set it up so that we would just roll the camera, and the camera would just roam around it. Two cameras actually roaming around it. We did probably 12 or 15 takes of that, and it's like a 5-minute scene. So by the end, I think you were pretty pissed, Miles, by the end. But they
you mean like?
Pretty drunk. The whole movie, hammered.
Yeah, I mean, the big drum solo was, we did one kind of master of it, and then everything else is so fragmented, so it was kind of, I'd storyboarded everything out and done an animatic to it and everything, so I knew kind of, okay, Miles, we're going to do, you know, measure 16 to 18 right now, okay, cut, now we're going to go to the symbol and do, you know, the coda of the song, okay, now we're going to do the bridge, you know, twice through from, you know, this lower angle. So we played it out that way. But I remember the real trick with the solo, both for JK and for Miles, was continuity, because, you know, we only had extras as audience members in the theater for, you know, like 6 hours. So everything pointed in that direction had to be done at once, and then you kind of flip around, and, you know, these band members we wanted to let go, and then we wanted to let Miles go and do the band members, and we let JK go. So you wanted to schedule and everything too.
I'm so glad I didn't have to think about all that crap that you had to think about when we were doing that.
You're very
Oh
lucky.
my God. It's stressing out.
Figuring out
You
the
talk
sweat
about it.
levels of, you know, you'd be like on Miles, be like, okay, now it's gonna be now we got to do like the end of the
Bag my
solo right
cheeks
now. And like, so Miles has to be dripping with sweat. Okay, now we got to go back to like the very beginning of the song. So Miles doesn't have sweat yet, and it's just like you were in and out of. I just have these wonderful images of an entire like posse of makeup people descending on Miles every time we like reset up.
It's just one dude with a hose.
Okay. I was like, where's this voice coming from?
I honestly, there was no conscious role model or anything that I used. I read the script and it was all there on the page. It was all there, and I just felt like I understood it, and I you know would be able to be the guy to help lift it off the page, and then you know once we started shooting, Miles and I just you know really settled into a rhythm and had a good time, and as we've referred to, 19 days. I mean, it was pretty much bing bang boom. So you know, we just went and did it, and Damien, you know, turned on a camera or whatever the hell he did.
And then, yeah, for me, same thing. It's, you know, because a lot of people have been asking me, because this movie it's pretty, you know, autobiographical for Damien. They said, well, did you ask him, you know, advice or about the character and all this stuff? I said, you know, not really. I mean, I asked Damien absolutely some technical questions with drumming, because he is a better, you know, jazz drummer than I am, and so I, you know, was using him for that as much as I could. But for the character, it was all there on the page. Like, it was very clear what Andrew Neiman was all about. I mean, it was probably the most clear for him as any character that I've ever done. You know, a lot of characters, a lot of different things going on, this and that, but for Andrew, he wants to be, you know, the greatest drummer of all time, and that's really his sole kind of, you know, desire. And then other than that, it's just like dealing with this guy every day on set. Yeah, my mom used to drive me every day to school for a long time, and then I started driving, so I drove myself. But no, I started with piano when I was like 6, and my 2 older sisters both played instruments. My sister Dana, she's 18 months older than me, and I think we were pretty much right. Anything I would do, she would do, and vice versa. I mean, she was the only girl playing in boys Little League baseball, and she played on my team, and she was really good. She was just, you know, she was better at piano than I was. She played clarinet, I played saxophone. She was a better woodwind player than I was, and then I started moving away from that stuff into like guitar and you know, drumming and played in some bands and stuff. And yeah, I just, everywhere I went, my drums went with me. I went to NYU, a very small dorm. I had a drum kit, and now out in my house, you know, 3 miles from here, I had my drum kit. And yeah, I never really had a music teacher like that. There was a piano teacher that tried to push me, but I was like 11, and I say it's not worth it. So I quit and taking lessons and just kind of started listening to music. And then with sports, I had a baseball coach that used to yell just for the sake of yelling, it seemed like, and that did nothing because we didn't respect him, because we just didn't know where he was coming from. With JK, you can understand where he's coming from. He's not just a guy yelling, you know, kind of, you know, very funny, you know, vulgar statements that people all day. Nobody cares about that guy.
He's talking about JK, not...
Yeah, no, I'm just talking about JK offset, when like they didn't have what he wanted at craft services or...
Trying to get the best out of Miles.
Yeah.
And I think it worked out, okay?
Yeah. So I had a driver's ed teacher that had severe issues with anger. but it didn't push me to be like a better driver. I was just like, dude, we're like 15, we just want to get our license. Like, out of nowhere, this guy, he's so pissed.
Damien, that sounded like a smart guy question.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I'll jump in first. It's tough because the movie operates on the screen actually in a way I think differently than it did on the page for me, and I think that's because there's not, the music itself is not on the page. When writing it, I think in my mind it was, certainly a more tragic ending than a victorious ending, and really an ending about someone sort of gladly returning to an abusive relationship, and on the screen it's interesting because on the screen you film a great drum solo to that kind of music and it does something, and so I think that I hope that there's still the question that is kind of my hope through the scene was to kind of give you a certain amount of a kinetic rush, but leave you with a question that maybe, makes that rush a little more troubling. And so, my hope is that still kind of lingers in there. But yeah, that's.
Thank you.
That was something that I know Damien had in mind from the beginning. As he just said, it was one of the very first things that he and I talked about when we first met and sat down and thought we were pitching ourselves to each other for the job because I wanted to do it and he wanted me to do it. We were like, anyway, was that ambiguity that that his point was to inspire discussion and debate and not decide, are we happy for Andrew Neiman or are we, lamenting his loss of humanity at the end of the film. And I think based on the reception and the discussions that we've been involved in so far, I think that's exactly what he achieved. Plus, it's just like awesomely entertaining that, to end the movie with a 10-minute drum solo. Melissa?
I think this is all for you.
I definitely think.
I want you to answer for me whenever you're done for you
Collectively.
Well, for me, the whole digital technical age is really overwhelming and kind of terrifying thing. So I hope that there is a way to remain an artist and not have to, publicize yourself on so many fronts, because I just let it speak for itself. I think that's what's so special about this movie, is that's all Andrew's doing, and I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's also funny that certainly it was very conscious in terms of how I wrote Andrew, and I think how Miles played him. Andrew's kind of an anachronism. I mean, he's not really even interested in contemporary drummers. And I wasn't when I was growing up. I was interested in Joe Jones and Chick Webb and Buddy Rich and Sid Catlett,
Travis Barker.
Miles and I differ there. And so, it was important to me that this was a kid who, the pictures on his wall were black and white. The music he was listening to was, mostly from the 70s or earlier. He held his sticks with traditional grip, whereas almost all drummers today use match grip. He, angled his snare drum down, like the old military style, whereas most modern drummers angle their snare drum up. So all these little things were important, that he's the guy who lives in this artistic bubble that almost has nothing to do with contemporary life, which means whenever he exits his bubble and goes to the dinner table or he's met with, indifference or worse.
And then, I think what's tough for, an actor, especially a young actor, you just want to work. I mean, very few actors, I think, are really, truly steering, their career, because it's, it is tough. If all you want to do was, independent films, do they give you the most kind of control over a character? And a lot of the time, are they do they have the most integrity? Yeah, but you literally, you don't make any kind of money really from that. And so I remember Joe Pantaleone came to my class when I was in college, and people were asking his advice on, how you do movies and stuff. And he said, my advice for you guys, he said, do 3 movies a year, do 1 for the money, do 1 for the art, do 1 for the location. He said, you'll be happy. So it is, hopefully you can kind of balance it out, or you can do some things because, maybe you want to maybe you want to be able to go on vacation, maybe you want to live in a bigger apartment, and so you can, hopefully do something. Yeah, you want to make yourself happy, but at the end of the day, we picked art as a job and as an income, so the line gets a little blurry there sometimes.
Yeah, the art commerce line definitely gets blurred. But as far as modern, I'm not on Facebook or Twitter or any of that just because I'm a dinosaur and I'm lazy. So, it's.
But you have started DJing.
Yeah, oh yeah, I've been doing that all along. Me and my 15-year-old, yeah. So, yeah.
But I'm sure have you been pressured to get on Twitter and get on that stuff? And
just by Twitter?
Yeah, just by. Yeah.
I'm glad to be. It is interesting that the different, even as a script, the different reactions the script would often get. That people who hadn't been drummers or hadn't been into music school or hadn't been in that kind of competitive world, the immediate question was always, this can't, they can't be like this. And I remember literally the same time were kind of, I was showing it to drummers who, this one guy who's the drummer for Lincoln Center, Jazz at Lincoln Center, and works with Marcellus and everything, and he had a complaint as well, but the complaint was exactly the opposite. It doesn't go far enough. It was worse for me. So I think what's fascinating is that there's this whole side of the world that most people just don't know about. So a lot of music movies fit into a certain mold. It's important to me that if nothing else, this music movie was going to showcase things I hadn't seen before in music movies, and that was the blood, that was the physicality of it. We don't think of instruments as physical. We think of dance as physical. We think of sports as physical, but music, we don't. But trumpeters screw their lips up, violinists screw their backs up, and drummers screw their hands up. And so that was really important. And then otherwise, certainly I had a teacher like J.K. and it made me a better drummer. But I also, as a kind of humanist, can't condone what he does, and I wanted to kind of make the character as monstrous as possible, so that it's hard as possible to condone what he does. But it's undeniable that it's a big part of jazz and music history, this kind of streak of tyranny leading to great musicianship.
That kind of pisses me off, actually, that they were worse than me. I wanted to, especially after I met Miles, I wanted to go farther. They just kept reining me in. Yeah, I think Damien and I have very similar philosophies there, and again, that's the debate. I love that this movie is inspiring that debate. How far is too far? How much is too much? Is it worth it? I've made the comparison before. This kind of relentless abuse might be necessary and appropriate if you're training Navy SEALs. I don't know if it's appropriate in music school, but it's there, and it can be productive. There's no denying that. It's just from my own perspective, I'd rather have a pretty girlfriend than go work with this guy and have my hands bleed all the time. I would have made a different choice.
It's the weird answer is that it was actually a budgetary, practical consideration. Certainly, I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up going into New York every weekend to go to clubs like Fat Cat and Smalls and watch jazz. So
God, you're a nerd.
Yep. I did. That was my rockin' Saturday night. So I wanted to shoot there. Even with the tax credit sort of situation, what wound up making LA make more sense was we had an infrastructure in place in LA in terms of the crew we wanted to work with and cast we wanted to work with, and so it just for the limited amount of money and time we had shooting in LA and then doing a day of exteriors in New York just wound up making more practical sense. And so we wound up, we shot mostly downtown LA and had an amazing production designer, Melanie Jones, who's also a New Yorker. And so we were very kind of, conscious about not just making stuff seem like New York, but making it seem, because you're not shooting in New York, you actually have the opportunity to do something a little different. You have the opportunity to create a kind of nightmare vision of New York that's almost more 1970s New York. That's almost more the New York of like the Warriors than the New York of today. So that was the kind of trip for me. 'Cause downtown LA, you know, when you're shooting there at 4 a.m., it can get pretty seedy.
Yeah.
A little bit.
I think the one kind of gendered sort of idea that kind of I had that informed some of that is that as a musician growing up, you're immediately, you know, or artist of any stripe really, versus the kind of, you know, the athletes around you, you're immediately made to feel less masculine, and so everything kind of stemmed from that. It's Andrew and a lot of jazz musicians of his ilk are, you know, people who are kind of giving their heart and soul to an endeavor that is not really appreciated in the outside world, and so I think a lot of these self-hatred and hatred to other people and cruelty and emasculation kind of stems from that. But the only way that it kind of applied to me as a kind of masculine thing, and not just because I think that there's so many equivalences in for women. The only thing that I think applied in that sense was this idea of like of music, of jazz, especially being like sissy. It's like, you know, it's like you're already not doing rock and roll, let alone football, you know. So yeah. I think JK calling me a nerd for going to Fat Cat every weekend, I think, highlights my point.
Well, it is a nerdy thing to do. So
I was a Fat Cat too.
It's an interesting,
Thank you.
You're a nerd?
I was a nerd.
I actually used to go to Fat Cat.
the nerd table over there.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, what?
What? No, I'm just kidding, man. I'm just
Okay.
trying to,
All right.
obviously,
Yeah, all right.
be at the sports bar with you. Hello.
Yeah, my dad was a jazz drummer, and he would actually carry his drumsticks in his cowboy boots in case of an altercation in Texas.
It's good when your instrument doubles as
In
a
case
weapon.
somebody said traditional grip is for losers.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, when I read the script, I was very thankful for this opportunity. You know, it is scripts like this I had not read one kind of that demanded so much of a character, you know, kind of my age, let alone one where I would get to play the drums in. So I was very, you know, I was happy that Damien, you know, wrote something like this and that he did have me in mind for it. And then, yeah, for the others, I mean, we really didn't have that much prep time at all. It was like 3 weeks going into it. And so you never have as much time to prepare for something kind of as you want to. But for me, this seems to be a movie, yeah, where I got to show, you know, yeah, there's like vulnerability and stuff, but it was really a movie about just like drive and grit, and it's almost shot like a boxing movie. There was just like two guys just going, you know, head to head with each other, and I thought it was cool, man. It's got everything in the movie that I'd want to be a part of when I was in college. Like, this would have been a movie, you know, that I said I hope to do. It's a movie with integrity. It's a movie that's unapologetic. It's a movie that is kind of pushing the boundaries, and is a movie that should leave you, you know, really talking about it and creating like a discourse and having people excited to explore some of the themes in it. So yeah, this is everything that I could have asked for in a project at that point in my career.
Except for maybe 5 more days to shoot it.
Yeah, except for like 5 more days, and yeah, I mean, stuff like that. Gain a little more weight in my face. Every day I'm drinking that like banana milkshake from that. Did you get some of those?
No.
That place next door?
No.
With the whipped cream on top?
Only the actors got
You know what I'm talking about?
No, man, that's whipped cream.
Well, yeah, probably not for you because you're.
Yeah, it felt great. I mean, movie screenings remind me of being a drummer on stage and being terrified. It's like my new form of stage fright, except you don't have any control over it. So yeah, I mean, I was certainly nervous before it screened. You know, we were opening night at Sundance, and so it, you know, felt like a tough spot to kind of, you know, to play the movie in, and but it was great. You know, it was awesome. I was there with Melissa and Miles, and Paul Reiser was there as well, and it was just it was a really fun kind of week of sleeplessness and, you know, enjoyment.
Good.
Yeah, it's funny. I just had the wonderful opportunity to work with Kate Winslet in a small part, but got a couple of weeks with her on set, and she was telling me about she did this movie with Jude Law and Sean Penn, back in the day. I forget the name of it, but she was saying how they were all so nervous for the table read in New Orleans because they knew that her and Jude were so nervous because they knew that Sean was driving down there, and that. She was just like, and he's probably going to do that American actor thing where you just show up and you let it go and just fucking magic happens and you're just like, that's genius. She's like, but for me and Jude, maybe it's just a culture thing, but it's just that they really prepare, kind of over-prepare, and they're very, they have a very strong idea of how they're going to, I guess, say the lines or whatever it is, and she was like, and then Sean's just going to show up and fucking wing it, and it's just going to, be incredible. So, I don't know, I think that preparation obviously is an actor's greatest tool, and then once you get there, you just have to respond, because, like I said, it's not theater where you get to rehearse with these people and really feel out beats for weeks and weeks and months. For this, I had kind of an idea of what JK was going to do, but this movie only works if we are in that same scene together, because Damien has talked about it's kind of showy roles for both of us, but but if JK's if we're not responding to each other, then you lose so much of what really is happening. So
and that's where the fun is, and in order to be able to do that, you do need to prepare. But at the end of the day, we didn't really prepare in terms of working on the scenes together at all. There just wasn't time for that. And I actually prefer to work that way. If you're working with good actors, who can listen and who come in with their, he had to prepare a lot with the drumming and this and that. And if you're, whatever the role is, if you're working on an accent or a dialect or specific skill set that your character has that you don't necessarily, like playing the piano, then that's the kind of preparation that I find absolutely necessary. The rest of it, for me, if the words are good on the page, the rest of it just comes from spending some time with the script, and not like learning lines, but absorbing what the script has to offer, and then to have, especially with a young director, a young writer-director, to be allowed the freedom to, occasionally depart from the page a little bit and just kind of throw the ball back and forth and throw each other a curveball. Was an added part of the fun too, and the fact that Damien is self-confident enough to not sort of get his ego damaged by, oh, wait a minute, you didn't put that comma in that sentence, or you said perhaps instead of maybe, that's always a beautiful amount of freedom to have as an actor as well.
Yeah, the 3 days I was on set, I always loved how collaborative it was, and how Damien, a lot of the times that we would find the moments and the beats that we were looking for was through the improv. And, we go from something like where we'd say, well, why don't we say this time, and it wasn't necessarily rigid but more prepared, and then the next day you'd be like, okay, throw it out the window and just see how it feels. And that kind of freedom is amazing.
Yeah, collaborative
really
is the key word there. That's my favorite word in movie making. I've been so blessed to have the opportunities that I've had, and if somebody asked me to play a, Terrence Fletcher-esque character, next week, I would be reticent to do so. Part of the joy of doing what we all are fortunate enough to do here is you get to do something different every time out, and I learned that at the very beginning when I've been doing theater for 20 years, but when I first started doing camera acting, and really Oz was my first sort of big thing that a lot of people saw. And I knew going into that it was a potential trap, that I could be playing the Nazi of the week on TV for the rest of my life. And from nowhere, I all of a sudden Law and Order called and said, hey, would you like to play the shrink on Law and Order? And it was like this perfect yin-yang thing that I had at the very beginning, so that I was perceived as a guy who could do a variety of things. And I think, that's what we all want to do. We all want to not repeat ourselves constantly, and explore the limits of our capabilities. So I just want to do something different than whatever I just got done doing.
I dumped my girlfriend right before the press tour for this. So I just knew.
She's a really, really sweet girl, too.
Yeah, and I just had to trim the fat. I'm just kidding, we're still together.
I think that's another line that's not necessarily blurred, but that we all kind of in this profession, like, have to figure out, you know, how, because there are definitely times where work kind of takes over without you even knowing, and your brain kind of just gets in this one track, for me at least, like with blinders on, where it's like, this is all I care about right now, this is all I want to think about, this is all I'm living right now, but, you know, I don't necessarily think that's the way to live either. Like, it's pace and balance, and like, pace is a really difficult thing to measure in this world, you know, because everything moves quickly. I mean, 18 days is a really fast, quick thing to do, but then, you know, you have to find time for the simple things. Like what? You nodded your head.
Nodding to the question.
Oh.
I would never do that. No. I guess I'll go first, just on the latter part. No, I mean, not specifically. It certainly raises questions that have been, you know, kind of in my mind about. But I think the one thing that I think that I was really looking for in this character and with Melissa was to see a little bit you know, like we talk about a lot, is like, this is the human casualty of what this movie's about, and trying to kind of remind people that this is not, that other people are affected by this, and that, you know, it's one thing to kind of have Miles or Andrew kind of, you know, strip things away in their life and devote themselves and everything, but at a certain moment you have to actually like look at the face of someone who's affected by that, because it's very easy, the same way we blot out any kind of collateral damage, you know, as faceless, as a, you know, on an individual basis or on a political basis in the country. It's, you know, that's where it gets really troubling. So on a very small kind of micro level, it's important to me that I think I knew right away. I think we talked about this, the breakup scene with Liv on her face, and that Miles was just kind of have, you know, as though he practiced this thing to a white wall, and in his mind he might as well be delivering it to a white wall. It's like there's nothing there, and that we're seeing what he can't see, which is a good person being totally mistreated the same way that Fletcher mistreats everyone, and that we're going to be on her case as close as we are on the trombone player in Fletcher's class or any other musician who gets utterly abused, and that he's becoming a Fletcher. That's kind of how we sort of talked about it.
Right. And for me, I mean, a lot like these guys, the second I read the script, it was kind of a no-brainer that I wasn't going to let myself not get the part, just because I knew how special it was. And for me, Nicole was not necessarily that much of a departure from things that I had experienced. I moved to New York and didn't know anyone and was going to school, and I knew what I wanted to do, unlike her, but I really understood from the get-go just the longing for a real connection. And her, I think she's so attracted to the passion he feels because she's lacking it in a lot of ways. She doesn't know where to put it, what she has inside of her, and I think that's a really tragic thing about her. What makes her casualty even more depressing.
No, we hoped that it would be kind of a sad moment, but also, the only thing I'll say also is that I think there's also a tendency to kind of, certainly the message of the movie seems to be that, like, you know, if you don't know what you want to do in your life, like, you know, screw you. And that's really not what, you know, it was important to me also that Andrew there's one thing, it's like Andrew going to the dinner table, those people are kind of assholes, and you're sort of like, well, good for Andrew to stick up for himself there. But I think to me, Nicole represents, like, you know,
That was actually going to be my roommate, Rob, because we shot a scene where she shows up at the final performance, and, you know, there's a two-shot of her and her new boyfriend, which was my roommate. But
and I actually
they cut that out.
The scene, when we were on the phone, I was sitting in my bed, like, petting my dog while we were doing that scene.
Yeah,
That's how I envisioned you.
My boyfriend. We were going to redo the dialogue, her side of the audio that scene. She was just kind of, you were just doing it just for us to have something to do, and it was so great that, I think the sound guys were angry at me for insisting that we keep it in, but.
That's such a basic thing, but it's such a beautiful way to shoot a phone call like that for the actor who's being filmed, and for the actor who's not being filmed.
Yeah.
And it's so, I can think of one other time in my career that's the way a phone call was shot, and it's just so smart and so good, and I'm glad you did it that way.
Sounds better too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly makes it tricky to make a movie about someone who, where part of the point of movies is to become really good at something, sort of like, I wanted to make sure at the end of the movie we weren't going to cut to the audience and see them going, whoa, like the way some movies do to tell you that someone is suddenly good, or hear like the single clap starting to. But yeah.
We didn't have enough extras for that anyway.
It would have
Shot
just been
them
a
nothing.
single
Yeah,
clap.
exactly.
Yeah, with the one guy.
Helen Escobar.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's like growing up, it's true that, my dad's a mathematician, and I grew up on the same street as Andrew Wiles, who sort of, solved Fermat's last theorem, which is like this, game-changing event in math history. But I remember when, the headlines were about, this proof coming out. It's like this 200-page proof that literally, I think 5 or 6 people, not even exaggerating, in the world can thoroughly understand. So those 5 or 6 people have to determine whether it's accurate or not, and then it's accurate. And this is literally like one of the greatest intellectual achievements in human history, that 5 or 6 people on Earth can actually understand. That to me is so, that's the extreme of it, but I think it's fascinating. How do you judge what's good or not based on that? So there's a little bit of that kind of my fascination about that when it comes to any sort of pursuit, especially artistic. But with Andrew, there's different kinds of drumming, and I think it was also sort of a decision early on that Buddy Rich would be kind of the style of drumming that he'd be playing in. There's a lot of jazz drummers who are more subtle and more, whose greatness is a little harder to, if you listen to someone like Sid Catlett or something who drummed with Louis Armstrong, it sounds very simple at first, and you have to listen for a while to realize what a genius he is. Buddy Rich's genius is kind of right there immediately. So for the purposes of this movie, that was the kind of drumming that we had to go for. It's no less valid. But we definitely thought a lot about kind of how to communicate that greatness, and not just through the music, but through how it's shot at the end, that, you should be able to watch the final drum solo silent and still get that he's an amazing drummer.
By the way, I thought that mathematical proof, that was total bullshit. I mean, you can poke so many holes in it.
You wanted that back.
I crawled out of a car. That scene was totally based on, in high school, I flipped a car 2 times down a hill, and I had scars in my hand, but I was fine otherwise. I walked out, and the next day, so I compressed the time a little bit, but I remember, I walked out and I went to like a neighbor's house and put like bandages around my hand, and that was it. And the next day, we had our big end of the year concert, and so I will always remember playing the drums with bandages around my hands, bleeding.
Oh my God!
I did not know that.
Fuck?
Damn!
Jesus!
It's just more autobiographical than you think.
Oh my God!
You didn't really write anything.
I have no imagination.
Hopefully the rest of you wouldn't do that.
No, these guys are all very sane.
JK and I both had injuries on set. When I was filming Fantastic Four, I took a big chunk out of my finger. I had to go to base camp, get 9 stitches in, and then go back and finish.
Yeah, I took 9 stitches in the head in the middle of a day on Oz and went back to work. I mean, you got to be a hockey player, at a certain point. So, it's not crawling out of a flipped car.
Miles,
that's a little crazy.
broke, what did he do to your ribs?
Miles did bust up my ribs a little bit.
Oh my God.
Fortunately, that was towards the end. Now it's over here.
Yeah, he'd slap me on set every day, and then Andrew finally gets a little revenge, and we're waiting to shoot the next time. Like, where's JK? And like, oh, yeah, he cracked too. It was real.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's certainly certainly the idea of doing an origin story, whether that's superhero or not, but like we have movies about, kind of ready-made geniuses, so to me it's like, it's the same thing as like becoming a superhero. It's like Charlie Parker, there's a kind of missing year in his life that we don't know much about between 18 and 19, where he, this so-called, this mythic, Reno Club story that's in the movie happens, and then he disappears for a while, goes to the Ozarks and practices, and we don't know what happens, and he comes back to Kansas City, and suddenly everyone starts talking about there's this new saxophonist, someone here who's the greatest saxophonist we've ever seen in our lives. And this was a kid who just a year ago had been considered a talentless sort of, wannabe. So what the hell happened? It's one of the great kind of questions in jazz history, and there's lots of parallels to lots of other musicians. So that to me was what was interesting. Make a movie about that period, so it's the same way that like probably my favorite superhero origin movie is Unbreakable, because it's like not really, it's a superhero movie, but it's the same thing as someone who's kind of plucked by someone else and turned into something that, and maybe it's good and maybe it's not, So I don't know, I love that movie, but I definitely liked approaching this as an origin story that would end with the phoenix, rising from the ashes, for sure. The Godfather is also obviously, like every other filmmaker, a movie I ripped off. Tried to think a lot about those last images of like Paul Reiser looking at his son, a lot like Diane Keaton looking at Al Pacino becoming this monster.
Don't talk about it.
He wanted me to put some stuff in my cheeks, and like pleasure, and I'm like, why would I do that?